she said, my name is Andrea Fallon-Korb. I have a background in sports psychology. We're going to talk today a little bit about kind of the F word, the failure word, and kind of how to deal with that and overcome it when we start to fear it a little bit. But before we get started, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about kind of who I am and where I come from. So I am not a native New Yorker. I'm originally from Kansas. So I know for 90% of you, there's some type of Wizard of Oz reference that's running through your head right now. I've heard every single line quoted. If you want to say something about the Wizard of Oz, please just make it really creative, because I've heard it all. But I grew up in a very, very small town. You know, it was a small town, so small that we had a newspaper, you know, our town newspaper, but there wasn't enough news for it to come out every single day. And so it actually only came out once a week. So when I was in high school, it was a really big deal when we got our second stoplight in town. Like, it actually made the front page of our newspaper 2 consecutive weeks in a row. So, you know, it's big time when that happens. Okay. You know, the town was so small that, you know, I was in advanced math, and the only advanced math teacher in my 7th grade happened to be my dad, which was awesome because he loves to tell really, really, really corny jokes, which just made me slink in my seat a lot. But it was one of those towns where, you know, everybody knows everybody. It can be a really great thing, but it can definitely have its problems as well. Okay, so just a little bit of preface, and I'll kind of come back to my story in a little bit. But so today we're going to talk a little bit about the fear of failure. But before we get started, I thought we'd do a little activity together. Okay, so up here is an optical illusion. Okay, you've likely maybe seen something similar to this before. You likely know what to think. So if I had you compare the 2 vertical lines, this top line and this bottom line, and asked you which one is bigger, what would you say? The top one's bigger? Same size? Yes. So I'm hearing a lot, kind of same size, top line's bigger. Okay. Well, you know optical illusions, so you know what the correct answer is, right? So what am I going to say the correct answer is? Same size. Actually, they're not. Okay. I manipulated this image so that there was a little bit of difference, and the top line is technically bigger. Okay. So, for those of you who said that they were the same size, what you're experiencing right now is failure. Okay, you failed. And my guess is likely there's going to be several thoughts running through your head. So it could be something like, you know, I shouldn't have shouted out, I shouldn't have commented, I shouldn't have followed my gut instinct. And you're going to learn from that, right? So, I'm going to give you another optical illusion and ask you, which line's bigger? Okay. So my guess is, for those of you who said that it was the same on the last one, this time you may be hesitating a little bit. You're kind of questioning things, you're really looking at evaluating, you're probably not as likely to go ahead and speak up. But that's the wrong lesson to learn. Okay. Because of that sense of failure, you're not as willing to risk and to shout out. And so that sense of failure is definitely what we're going to be talking about. And that fear of failure, that not wanting to speak up the second time is what we're really going to be addressing today. You should still be willing to shout something out. So as I was preparing for this talk, I just Googled the word fail to kind of get me in the mindset to go. So I don't know if you in the back can see this, but I just Googled the word fail. And there were over 600 million responses, 600 million different web pages that talked about failure. So what this says to me is that failure is a really, really common thing. Failure is something that everybody experiences, and failure is something that a lot of people really care about. Okay? So, what is fear of failure? Okay? So, fear of failure is essentially worrying about failing. And in our society, we're conditioned to fear failure as if we don't fail, somehow we're going to be successful. But that's not actually true. In reality, a lack of failure is a lack of risk-taking. It's a lack of being willing to take those risks you need to have good success, to be really successful. So why do we fear failure if this is something that everybody experiences? Does anybody have any ideas? Yeah.
We worry about what other people think.
Exactly. We worry about judgment. We worry about the judgment not only of ourselves, but also from others. We worry about what other people are going to think about us when we screw up. Okay? So here are the 6 top sources of fear. So fear of losing a match or a game. I know you've all probably experienced that. So fear of negative self-evaluation, fear of negative social evaluation, that's worried about maybe what your coaches may think of you, your peers, your parents, what they may think about you if you fail. A fear of embarrassment, kind of self-explanatory. Letting other people down, again, maybe yourself, maybe your teammates, your coach, your parents, maybe significant others on the sidelines that may be watching. A fear of not performing up to other people's expectations, as well as a fear of actually making mistakes. So I told you a little bit kind of about where I came from growing up in the small town of Kansas. Let me go a little bit into more detail about my story. So my story, well, it wasn't necessarily a classic failure. My failure kind of as an athlete as I was growing up was actually a failure to stay healthy. I've broken 12 bones. I've had 2 major surgeries. I actually had 6 consecutive years of injury from my freshman year of high school through my sophomore year of college that really took me out of a lot of sports. So my freshman year of high school was something that I played every single sport I could. I ran cross country, volleyball, basketball, track, softball. I kind of did it all. So after my freshman year of basketball, I was put on this list of kind of top freshman players in the state of Kansas, which was really cool. And so I started to get some college, my really goal was to get out, to go to college and to play basketball, because basketball was my passion. So after my freshman year, I really started to get a little bit of interest, but that started my string of 6 consecutive years. So my freshman year, at the very end of the season, I sprained my ankle so badly that I actually had to get casted for 8 weeks, which is virtually unheard of. My sophomore year, I pole vaulted 2 years in track. And so my sophomore year, I was pole vaulting, but something happened. I came down and actually broke 4 bones in my left wrist. So I decided that I was going to switch to softball because I was kind of done with pole vaulting. Fear of failure. So I switched to softball, and I was kind of the utility player. They put me wherever. That year, I was the catcher. And we actually beat a team out of basketball. They're sectionals. They were the #1 team in the region, and this basketball player is pretty angry at me. She was also a pretty good softball player. And there was a pretty nasty play at the plate, and I ended up breaking my right wrist a couple of times. My senior year, I had sports-induced asthma, and I had a series of asthma attacks that put me in the emergency room a couple of different times. So again, 4 consecutive years my freshman or in my high school career. And that was something that, my mom actually had conversations with the doctors of, she's getting injured all of the time. Do we actually need to do like bone density scans or things like that because she's always injured? But what he said was, we kind of explained every single thing that happened, and he's like, no, these are just kind of freak accidents that's happening to her. It's, it's nothing to do kind of physically with what's going on. They're just really freak accidents. Okay? But how this connects to my fear of failure was, I feared the negative social evaluation. Because I was constantly injured, people poked fun at me all the time, constantly calling me gimp and, casty and different things like that. And it wasn't just my peers who were doing that. The adults were doing it as well. We went to church every Sunday when I was growing up, and there was actually this one particular person that I avoided like the plague after church because he was one of the primary ones that always sought me out. Kind of these small towns, everybody knows everybody, and sought me out essentially to kind of poke fun at me because I couldn't stay healthy. So I definitely feared that negative social evaluation. I feared embarrassment, again, because I couldn't stay healthy, not necessarily my fault because they were all freak accidents, because everybody was constantly poking fun at me and calling me names and things like that. I definitely worried about being embarrassed. I also worried about letting other people down. My parents for years kind of drove me around playing AAU basketball, taking me to different summer camps, trying to help me be successful, help me improve my skills. And I definitely worried about letting them down because they'd spent so much time and energy and effort out there to help me get kind of seen. I wasn't able to perform up to other people's expectations because I was constantly injured and rehabbing and trying to come back from those. So not only was I not trying to perform to my own expectations, but also to other people as well. And, fearing mistakes was a big thing. 2 of those injuries happened in the spring, which for basketball is the primary time to be seen, especially for me coming from a rural, small town school that nobody really knows, playing on these competitive AAU teams to try to be seen by these college coaches going to summer camps. But I wasn't able to perform to my best because I was recovering from broken wrists both times. And, so I constantly had these things on my wrists and, trying to overcome them, so I wasn't able to play. So I knew any mistake that I made could potentially be that college coach not seeing me or kind of crossing me off their list. So those kind of, how that links to kind of the top sources of failure for me. It wasn't necessarily for me losing, but it was all of the other things kind of combining. So one of the things that Tracy talked about was perfectionism. Perfectionism definitely has a huge link with the fear of failure. The thing with perfectionism is perfectionists have really, really high expectations of themselves. It can be really great to you as an athlete because you're constantly striving, pushing, trying to reach those really high goals that you're setting for yourself. But when it comes to fear of failure, it's not really a great thing because a lot of times perfectionists are focused too much on avoiding mistakes and failure rather than being willing to take some of those risks. So they're focused so much on what not to do. So if I told you right now to not think of a pink elephant, what are you thinking of? A pink elephant, right? Okay. So what happens in your brain is when you tell yourself the negative things not to do or don't do this or different things like that, is your brain doesn't actually hear the negative. It hears everything else. And so when I say don't think of a pink elephant, you're thinking of a pink elephant. So a lot of times what happens with perfectionistic athletes is you have really high expectations, you may not be playing up to that level of expectation, and you're constantly telling yourself, well, don't do this or don't do that or stop doing this. But again, your brain doesn't hear that don't or not or stop, and it just hears the rest of it. And it can kind of perpetuate this kind of snowball effect, and it can really take a drastic impact on your performance. So talking about performance, what does a fear of failure, what kind of impact or influence does that have on your performance? And typically it has 3 impacts. The first one is that you try not to mess up. Okay? So you play cautious or timid, maybe playing it safe, maybe playing not to lose rather than playing to win. Maybe it's a reluctance of actually trying new things on the field that you're working on in practice that could make you successful in the long run, but you're not willing to do that because you're trying to avoid making a mistake or avoid making failure. So the first influence on performance is you're trying not to mess up. The second one is that you play to control. It's almost like you're trying too hard. I know from my own experience, a lot of times when I would really focus in and try really hard to do something, it would actually be really counterproductive and it wouldn't work for me in the long run. Because what happens is, maybe you've heard the concept of flow or being in the zone, and when things really slow down and you're really performing at your peak, when you're performing at your peak, a lot of times what happens is you're playing automatically. You're not thinking about kind of the mechanical things of what you're supposed to be doing, and you're just going out there and playing. But when it comes to fear of failure, you're thinking too much. You're playing controlled, you're trying too hard, which can have a debilitating impact on your performance. The third influence is that sometimes you can become immobile. You may have heard the concept of fight, flight, or freeze. If you experience a fear of failure, you may experience that freezing moment. You become completely immobile and you aren't able to do anything at all. Okay? With all of these, you'll likely experience a lot of anxiety, debilitating anxiety that will completely take you out of it. Because you're telling yourself, you're so worried about this constant fear and you're telling yourself not to do things, that it can almost create a self-fulfilling prophecy. That what you're trying most not to do, you actually do in the long run. Okay, you actually do instead. And a lot of times you have really harmful thoughts that go through your head. There can be a bunch of different things that go through them. Some examples are, oh, my coach is going to yank me if I do this. Or, my team is going to be really, really disappointed. So just kind of 2 quick examples. And ultimately with all of this, aside from the anxiety, is that you're likely going to have a very low confidence. And if you don't have much confidence, much belief in your ability to go out there and be successful, again, that self-fulfilling prophecy, you aren't going to be successful in the long run. Okay? So, with all of this, what can you do? How can you overcome that sense of failure when you experience it? I love this. So this is an acronym. It says FEAR stands for false evidence appearing real. And that's essentially what fear is. It's false evidence. Fear is something that you make up in your mind and you believe it is true. It's something that you conjure up in your mind. It's perception of the importance of something. It's perception of the judgment of others that you think may be occurring, but that's not actually true.